34 years, people could come to Marin County by ferry boat or train and then board a small steam train for a spectacular ride to the top of 2,600-foot Mount Tamalpais and coast down on silent gravity cars into the splendor of Muir Woods.
Thousands of visitors from throughout the world came by ferry across San Francisco Bay to Sausalito, where they transferred to the Northwest Pacific Railroad for the short trip into Mill Valley.
The train arrived a few minutes later in the center of Mill Valley, and passengers crossed a few feet of platform to the Muir Woods and Mount Tamalpais Railway.
By 1906, a small interurban steam train ran on the same tracks as the mountain railway, serving Mill Valley as a commuter train. The steam engine and its one car were later replaced by a gasoline-powered coach called a Kissel car. The local service of these cars was over 1 mile from the center of Mill Valley up Blythedale Canyon.
Each day for 34 years, the trains were brought from the shops to begin their labor of pushing carloads of passengers to an elevation of 2,400 feet.
Over 700,000 people crossed this platform between 1896 and 1930.
The original depot in Mill Valley was not very elegant, and the trains were wood-burning with diamond stacks belching acrid smoke. Later they were converted to oil.
Two types of locomotives were used. This was the most common engine, a shay. Because the climb was so steep, both locomotives had reduction gears to increase their pull. The other type of geared locomotive used was the Heisler locomotive.
To more clearly show the special engineering of these types of engines, motion pictures were taken of a Heisler engine operated by the Roaring Camp and Big Trees Narrow Gauge Railroad at Felton, California.
This Heisler locomotive is a sister to the last Heisler used on the Mount Tamalpais Railroad. The Muir Woods and Mount Tamalpais Heisler was sold to a logging company and retired in 1951. It is on display now in Scotia, California, near Eureka. Before each run, water had to be taken on for use by the locomotive, and at the top of the mountain was a large inn that was supplied with water drained from the train.
The Heisler engines cost about $7,000 and weighed 60,000 pounds and could exert 20,000 pounds of pulling effort.
The bell and whistle gave a final call to the passengers, and the climb from sea level to 2,400 feet in just over 8 miles began. Steam at 190 pounds per square inch was let into each of the two huge vertical cylinders. The pistons were forced down and up. The enormous crankshaft under the train turned gears, and the gears turned 8 drive wheels.
The track switches were set to guide the train out of the yard and into Blythedale Canyon. The train began to climb immediately. Here can be seen the mechanism of a Heisler engine. There was a cylinder on each side of the locomotive connected in a V configuration to a crankshaft. The crankshaft turned a drive shaft geared to the nearest front axle and nearest rear axle. The wheels on these axles each drove another set of wheels with connecting rods.
The other type of engine more commonly used was the shay geared locomotive. By using a model, the mechanism of the shay engine can be shown. The shay locomotives had their 3 steam cylinders all on the right-hand side. The pistons in these cylinders were connected to a crankshaft and drive shaft combination, which was geared to each axle on the locomotive turning 4 pairs of wheels. These geared locomotives were designed for logging operations, but they hauled cars of sightseers for years over the steep 281 curves of the railway.
The trains climbed 2 miles up Blythedale Canyon through the redwoods and madrone. The train speed uphill was between 8 and 12 miles per hour. The slow speeds afforded passengers leisurely views. From milepost 2 to milepost 4, curves became increasingly sharp and close together.
At milepost 4, the train entered the double bow knot where the track paralleled itself 5 times in a few hundred feet to gain elevation. In the bow knot was Mesa Station. The train had been pulling the gravity cars in addition to passenger coaches. Here some of the passengers would leave the main train and coast on the gravity cars 2½ miles to Muir Woods. At At the end of the day, one locomotive would go to Muir Woods and bring the gravity cars back to Mesa Station or Mill Valley. An additional gasoline-powered rail car could rapidly carry extra passengers to or from Mill Valley on very busy days.
From Mesa Junction in the double bow knot, elevation 1,000 feet, the train climbed to Boot Jack Siding at 1,730 feet and dropped off hikers, then continued to West Point Inn to deposit passengers bound for Bolinas by stage line. At milepost 8, the train was nearing Tamalpais Tavern, elevation 2,400 feet and the end of the run.
Passengers were ready to leave the train, to have lunch, or to stay overnight at the inn. The train passed through a wooden arch that often caught fire.
The Tavern of Tamalpais burned several times because of train-started fires or brush fires on the mountain. The only available water was hauled up by the trains either in a special tank car or in the locomotive's tender.
Here, a gravity car, filled with sightseers, stops among the ruins. On West Peak were two 300-foot radio transmission towers for marine communication. They were reached by a specially built cable railway. Above the Tavern of Tamalpais was an observation platform reached by climbing a short trail. The view on a clear day encompassed nearly a third of Northern California. Below could be seen the double bow knot, stage roads, trails, the bay, and some days even the Sierra was visible.
Here a Heisler engine is ready for the long descent. The engine had backed the passenger cars to the top. Now it could precede them down. Somewhat later, several gravity cars would coast down behind.
A Shea engine is in this shot, taken from a movie made in 1898. Since the engine was under little strain on the downgrade, hardly any smoke was produced, which might irritate the passengers' eyes.
The more daring people coasted down in gravity cars either to Muir Woods or to Mill Valley. Each car was operated by a brakeman.
These films were taken from a gravity car in 1906. Their remarkable clarity testifies to the quality of films and lenses available 70 years ago. In the roadbed of the curves can be seen safety rails to catch trains or cars that might derail. The gravity cars also had a special device in their undercarriage to lessen the danger of derailment. Only one fatality occurred in the 34-year operation of the railroad. In 1900, a Heisler engine derailed, killing the engineer. Investigations concluded that excessive grease on the track caused the accident. Thereafter, water sprays were installed on all engines and cars to lubricate the track on curves only as the vehicles passed, and because of evaporation, no residue could build up.
The train ran the maze of the double bow knot very slowly and usually stopped at Mesa Station in the knot to pick up passengers returning from Muir Woods.
This railroad was first incorporated in 1896 as the Mill Valley and Mount Tamalpais Railroad. E.A. Kent subscribed $10,000 and gave part of the right-of-way. At first, the railroad was planned to be electric, but the geared Shea and Heisler locomotives were quite satisfactory. The railroad was in operation by August of 1896 and ran until 1930. The line first was built only to the summit of Mount Tamalpais, but in 1905, Mr. William Kent, son of the original backer of the railroad, purchased what is now Muir Woods to preserve it from being logged off. An agreement was reached with the Mount Tamalpais Scenic Railroad, and in 1907 a branch line running from the double bow knot 2 1/2 miles to Muir Woods was opened.
Kent built in Muir Woods and leased to the railroad a $60,000 hotel. He also received a small percentage of each fare. In November 1907, a water company tried to legally condemn a piece of land in the center of the Redwood Grove for a reservoir. William Kent remained determined to preserve the grove. Kent deeded 300 acres to the United States under a new law recently signed by President Theodore Roosevelt. The area was officially named Muir Woods in honor of the great naturalist John Muir.
The Scenic Railroad was profitable for many years until auto and bus tour competition reduced its popularity. The Mount Tamalpais Railway ran 15 million passenger miles with one fatality and very few serious injuries. Here the train is moving down Blithedale Canyon and nearing Mill Valley. Soon on the side of the picture can be seen stacks of spare rails, some custom curved at the factory to correctly follow the very winding roadbed. In all, the train made the equivalent of 45 complete circles each run. The train returns to the Mill Valley station. Now the passengers can step across the platform to the Northwest Pacific Railroad for the return to Sausalito and the ferry.
The Shays and Heislers climbed the mountain nearly every day for 34 years until July 2nd, 1929.
A huge fire burned from Mill Valley across the east face of the mountain, destroying much of the railroad. The trains were used to haul firefighters and water until the ties themselves caught fire. An engine and several gravity cars were destroyed.
At first, reconstruction was started, but in 1930 a crew was hired to start from the top, pulling up track.
A gravity car was stripped to carry down track.
The railroad was offered to the United States, but this was refused. The engines ended up in various logging or construction operations. One was sent to the Philippine Islands. One gravity car still exists in poor condition in the Mill Valley Corporation yard. Most of the roadbed is still intact and is used as a fire road and is open to hikers. There have been several schemes for restoring part of the Mount Tamalpais Railroad, but for now at least, a very romantic and pleasant railroad is gone. Only flickering movies and flickering memories contain it.